Hi, this is Willie Nelson from NORML. For 30 years, NORML has provided a voice for the millions of Americans who smoke marijuana responsibly. More than 500,000 Americans are arrested each year for smoking pot. These are ordinary citizens like you and me, whose lives and careers are being needlessly destroyed. To learn how you can help, contact NORML at www.norml.org or call toll-free at 888-67-NORML.
And distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. This is your daily audio stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular audio podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about the show at our website, normalaudiostash.com. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. Welcome back to the Audio Stash. Today, I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Take a moment to join us at NORML to end marijuana prohibition in America. Just visit norml.org. First up on the Audio Stash today, we have some important breaking news. Breaking news today from the NORML Foundation. New Mexico, Governor Richardson signs medical marijuana bill. This morning, Governor Bill Richardson signed into law a measure that makes New Mexico the 12th state to allow the use of medical marijuana. Spearheaded by the work of the Drug Policy Alliance of New Mexico and Rena Sapansky, the bill allows patients with debilitating illnesses or in hospice to be certified to use marijuana when their doctors recommend it. The New Mexico Health Department would be in charge of obtaining and distributing the medical marijuana. There are no provisions for patients to cultivate their own medicine in the current legislation. The measure creates an 8-person team of healthcare professionals with expertise in serious medical conditions to oversee the program. Rules for distribution will be promulgated in an estimated 6 months. Governor Richardson, who is also a Democratic presidential hopeful, took personal care and time to see the medical marijuana legislation pass and stated to the press today that signing the bill was, quote, the right thing to do, close quote. Here's the director of the Drug Policy Alliance of New Mexico, Rena Sapansky. What's the next step for this to be implemented?
Well, temporary cards will be issued starting July 1 through the Department of Health for people who meet the criteria set out in the bill. And then the rules must be promulgated by October 1st, and that'll be when the entire program is officially set up. So I think Department of Health is going to start working on this very soon, probably the day after the governor signs it. And, we've got a lot of work to do to get a good program set up, but I think that everyone who's going to be working on it really just wants the best possible system for the patient. So I have full faith we're going to create a really great program here in New Mexico.
And this legislation does address the concept of distribution. Rena, how might that work?
We've talked about lots of possibilities, and I think that's probably, we can look to start all of the other states, the other 11 states, for examples as to what the best way to set up the registry is and the ID card system and those kinds of things. The distribution system, though, is something that no other state has in its law, and so we'll be forging into new terrain, and I think that we'll be consulting with lots of national experts, and we certainly want to be very careful about the federal law and the federal situation, and minimize the liability to the state, but also give the patient safe access. I think that's one of the problems that's been observed in other states is that, if you're really sick, you may not know how to get marijuana illegally. You may not be able to grow it yourself. It's a lot to expect from someone who's really seriously suffering. So, I think we want a high quality and available supply for patients, and I think that a lot of really smart people are going to be getting together to figure out how that's exactly going to work.
That was Rena Sapansky of the Drug Policy Alliance of New Mexico. Again, breaking news today that New Mexico's Governor Richardson has now signed the medical marijuana legislation into law, making New Mexico the 12th state to allow medical marijuana access.
And sure enough, in the morning, some strange things began to happen in Willie's home. But outdoors, strange things were happening too.
If I were to tell you that in America, right now, according to U.S. government surveys, there are over 1 million children selling marijuana, what would you think? Would you think that any public policy that creates over 1 million teenage marijuana dealers needs to be re-examined and possibly amended? You would not be alone. The members of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, otherwise known as NORML, have been working since 1970 to reform marijuana laws such that responsible adults, not children, sell and use marijuana. Isn't it high time to reform America's misguided marijuana laws? This is Alan St. Pierre, Executive Director of NORML in Washington, D.C. Only concerned citizens can effectively end the federal government's nearly 70-year-old prohibition on responsible adult marijuana sales and use. Want to know more about how you can help? Contact us at NORML, toll-free, 888-67-NORML, NORML, or by visiting the organization's popular and informative webpage at NORML, NORML.org.
Also today, we have some international news to cover. Canadian jail must allow patient to smoke medical marijuana. Canadian medical marijuana patient and activist Grant Krieger was sentenced to 4 months in jail last week, but the judge in the case delayed his entrance to jail so that smokable marijuana could be made available to Krieger while he is incarcerated. The ruling judge in Krieger's case delayed the start of his sentence until those provisions could be made that would assure his access to smokable marijuana while in jail. Krieger, 52, who has multiple sclerosis, was previously given a constitutional exemption allowing him to smoke marijuana for medicinal purposes. Krieger was convicted of trafficking charges last September for sending marijuana to a Manitoba resident who required the marijuana for medicinal purposes. The marijuana that was sent was produced as part of Krieger's work with the Compassion Club and his own Krieger Foundation. While agreeing with the Crown Prosecutor, Scott Cooper, that a jail sentence was warranted, Judge Pepler acknowledged Krieger has a constitutional right to have marijuana, and that constitutional right should not be lost while serving his sentence. Pepler also agreed with defense attorney John Hooker that Krieger's reasons for trafficking the marijuana were altruistic. The judge set a date in June to allow corrections officials enough time to make provisions for Krieger and allow him to prepare for jail. If provisions are made for Krieger to smoke marijuana in jail before that date, he has 48 hours to turn himself in to authorities. If provisions can't be made by the deadline, there will be another hearing with Judge Pepler on June 18th. Krieger is one of the most visible activists for medical marijuana in Canada and vowed to continue his fight for medical access for all Canadians despite his recent conviction. In October, Krieger had a conviction for cultivation, possession, and trafficking overturned by the Canadian Supreme Court, who found that directions issued to the jury by the judge in that case were misleading and had reduced the jury's role to a, quote, ceremonial one, close quote. That case had led to Krieger's constitutional exception. Krieger discussed the case in the October 29, 2006 audio stash. Here's that interview now. And Grant, tell us how all of this began.
Well, this all stems back to 1999 when I was arrested for cultivating. The first of the two jury trials, which was for myself personally, I won. And what I did is I won an exemption for a lifetime to be able to cultivate and possess what I need for my own medicine, cannabis marijuana. The second part of the trial was a jury trial over the trafficking, which I did win. They found me not guilty, but the Crown appealed it. And when it went up the ladder, they found that the judge erred in instructions to the jury, so I had to go back in front of another jury, which was the 2003 trial. Now, during the 2003 trial, the judge disallowed the defense of necessity, and as soon as he allowed the defense of necessity was out the door, what he told the jury was, I want you to go elect a foreman, find him guilty, and come back. Now, no judge can instruct the jury to find me guilty. He has to offer an array of options for the jury. However, the jury ran into problems with it. They asked for their oath card. The oath card went in. They kept mulling over the problem they had, and then two of the more elder jurors asked to be excused. And the judge refused them and berate them into finding me guilty, and eventually we had the jury pulled when they reached a decision, and all 12 people said I was guilty, but they were all crying. So at that point I had to appeal because I wanted the trial by my peers, not by a judge. And we appealed, and it went to the Supreme Court. I was there on January the 12th. It took them 10.5 months to release the decision, but I have a new jury trial coming now, providing the Crown, the Provincial Attorney General, wants to proceed against it. However, if they don't, I already have a jury trial lined up in Manitoba. I'll be coming on the docket next month to be able to get a trial date.
And are you being targeted here because of your high-profile activism on the part of patients in Canada?
Yes. I only have one interest, and the interest I have is for the ill, the injured, and the dying, because those people are very special, very near and dear to me. I know what it's like to be ill and not well, and everybody in this country is guaranteed a better quality of life by the Charter of Rights, but the trouble is the government doesn't give it to them. In fact, even with my exemption, I'm not able to cultivate because the insurance companies have stepped in and said I can't cultivate. I can't get insurance. Many problems going around on the marijuana board, so to speak, here in Canada between the government, the courts, Health Canada, and the people. Now, the only way things change in this nation is through jury trials. And when if a jury is not able to nullify a bad law, then that's society's conscience being cut off at the knees because they're not allowed to speak.
Granted, it sounds like there's a lot of confusion there regarding medical marijuana. Here in the U.S., we perhaps have an unfounded view that Canada is much more evolved than us when it comes to medical marijuana, but it sounds like it isn't being put into practice there.
Well, it's not. That's the problem. Like, you have states that have passed bills, but what happens is the Drug Enforcement Agency walk in and do the dirty work because they're autonomous. Up here in Canada, we have a government that was trying to decriminalize, that got pumped out of power. We have Stephen Harper in power now, and he's good friends with George W. Bush, and that's a mistake right there. I'm sorry to say it. Then, what we're doing is, here in Alberta, we're becoming more and more Americanized, where we're going to drug courts now. We want to go for the 3-strike rule. When I go to court on February 12th for sentencing, because I was in front of a provincial court judge on September 25th, and he found me guilty of 2 counts of trafficking. So now I'm looking at mandatory jail time coming February 12th because of the 2 counts of trafficking. In the meantime, the Supreme Court has rendered its decision. I'm supposed to be getting a new trial, and I have a trial lined up in Manitoba. It doesn't make sense anywhere. When a person provides a community service and he's providing help to people, there's no harm attached to that, and all laws are based on harm. So what harm did I do to justify jail time, fine, probation, or even the convictions?
Grant, you mentioned the jurors in tears, crying as they were polled in the verdict. Having worked as an activist there in Canada, what do you encounter as far as attitudes held by regular Canadians regarding medical marijuana?
Well, redneck Alberta is the worst place to be. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, those are the 3 red hard provinces. The rest of the provinces are fairly more liberal with the marijuana laws. It's a nightmare. It's just like in the United States. It's a nightmare because the government doesn't know what to do with it. The product they provide out of the mine shaft in Flin Flon is substandard. I wouldn't even use that stuff. It's trash. But the biggest stumbling block of them all are the insurance companies, because the insurance companies, I lost my license 18 months ago because, unfortunately, I couldn't get a signature on a form from a doctor because the insurance company stepped into the doctor and told him, you sign any forms for cannabis and we'll revoke your malpractice insurance.
It sounds like the hard-won rights of patients there in Canada to use medical cannabis are being completely sidestepped here by the insurance companies, who I assume are private for-profit companies.
Oh, everybody's for-profit. There's nobody that's not out for profit. Look at all the play toys these big boys have in the insurance companies. It's ridiculous what they're doing to us, but we're not sure here in Canada who's in charge. Is it the government, is it the court, or is it the insurance companies, or is it the police departments?
And Grant, how long have you used medical marijuana to treat your multiple sclerosis?
Well, I started using it in 92 in a heavier way, but I was also taking a bunch of pharmaceuticals, and I couldn't distinguish the side effects from the pharmaceuticals to what the cannabis was doing, because when you're taking a whole lot of pharmaceuticals and you add a new medicine into it, you can't distinguish what's doing what. And what I did one night is I took sufficient enough a dosage of pills that I wouldn't wake up the next day. And when I did wake up in the hospital, I wasn't quite happy because I didn't have my wish met. But then I had 2 choices. I could go back to the way I was, or I could look at things differently and try things differently. And I chose an alternative path. And the alternative path I chose has led me to a point where I have to fight for this. I have no choice because sick people need to get a hold of this, and if the government isn't going to supply it, I will. In fact, when I have a probation officer coming out here on December the 18th to do a probation report over those 2 charges of trafficking, and basically what I'm going to be telling her is the only way I'm going to be stopping what I do is if you give me life in jail without parole. And if I do ever get out of jail with my dying breath, I'll do the same thing I've done in the past.
Grant, I want to thank you again for joining us here on NORML's Daily Audio Stash to discuss your case today.
Well, I thank you very much, Chris, and I wish everybody out there a very happy day.
Grant Krieger is a medical marijuana patient and activist in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. His website can be found at kriegerfoundation.org. Krieger is waiting out a delay in his 4-month jail sentence in Canada until the jail and correction officials can make his smoked marijuana available to him while he is incarcerated. We have links for more information on our website today at normalaudiostash.com. Next up on the Audio Stash today, we're going to talk about medical marijuana in the state of New Hampshire. Stuart Cooper is the director of Live Free New Hampshire, and helped see through a piece of medical marijuana legislation that showed a lot of support but narrowly missed approval in the largest state house in the country. Stuart, welcome here to the Audio Stash today.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us today, Stuart. This legislation just again very narrowly missing passing a vote of the New Hampshire House last week, which comprises 400 members, far more than any other state house out there. But with 177 votes in favor of medical marijuana, was that level of support surprising?
Well, believe it or not, this really wasn't too much of a surprise. We knew coming into this that it was going to be a close one. We were actually hoping for, to get that edge, to go over that tipping point. Coming into this, we knew we had about 100 supporters who have voted for this in the past, primarily Democrats. And we knew that we had probably about 100 new Democrats in office, and we figured we'd be able to carry most of those votes. We also had a number of Republicans who are, you could say, more libertarian here in the state, who we thought we could count on. So it was a matter of targeting those individuals. But I knew that once the campaign progressed, we were doing our job of targeting these individuals. We had some difficulty getting the mainstream Republicans, the individuals who primarily vote no to any social change.
Now, both the Democratic and Republican House leaders there opposed the bill, so a lot of these elected officials broke party ranks to show their support with that 177 who voted for it.
Yeah, and that was very significant. The legislature had been voting very right down party line on a number of bills, and this was one where the leadership actually opposed on both sides. We were surprised that the Democratic leadership opposed us because in the past, members, including Terry Norelli, the Speaker, and the Deputy Speaker and the Majority Leader had all voted in favor of medical marijuana. We believe that this time around, now they're in a leadership position, they're a little more concerned about how the public perceives them. And even though 70% of New Hampshire voters supported this, they still opted to take that more conservative standpoint, while their body did just the opposite. The body had the courage to vote with the populace of New Hampshire and with the medical community.
And Stuart, tell us what this legislation, HB 774, sought to do there in New Hampshire.
Well, it sought to protect seriously ill patients who had their doctor's approval to get medical marijuana. It was based or modeled off of what the legislation that had gone through the Rhode Island and Hawaii legislatures previously. The bill allowed patients to grow their own marijuana, a restricted amount, within their own home in a secure location, but they could only do so if, one, they had a serious enough debilitating illness such as like cancer, AIDS, multiple sclerosis, glaucoma, severe nausea or chronic pain, and they had to have the written approval of a doctor after that bona fide doctor relationship had been established and their entire medical history had been reviewed and the costs and benefits of using marijuana, just like any other pharmaceutical, had been weighed. And this bill would have protected people. It would have allowed them to no longer be threatened by state-level law enforcement. And so essentially this was really a vote to protect our patients, to whether or not we should continue our war on patients or if we should protect them and allow them and their doctors to make healthcare decisions. So that's really what it came down to, whether or not we should protect or arrest our patients.
And I assume, Stuart, with such a strong showing of support this year that this legislation will be coming back.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, this is, we got a lot more support, a lot more people willing to come out and take a leadership position on this. And that's due in part to the campaign we ran. We ran one that involved a lot of grass top leaders. We had over 60 New Hampshire doctors sign in support of this. We had a head nurse at a Dartmouth Hitchcock Oncology unit provide testimony. We had a number of doctors provide written testimony, and we had a number of seriously ill individuals actually come in and testify. We had a lot of support, and we had, because of that support, we were able to influence these decision makers, and we have no doubt that the next time we bring this, we believe we'll pass it through the House.
And Stuart, when you interact with these legislators, what kinds of questions do you get, especially from those fence sitters on the issue?
Well, a lot of these individuals, especially in New Hampshire, are over the age of 55. And here in New Hampshire, we had a mix of some people who grew up through the, I guess you want to call it the marijuana generations, the 60s and the 70s. But you had another 50 or 60% of the individuals up here who grew up in the 50s and they're in their 70s and 80s. And different groups ask different things. The older individuals were concerned about the federal issue, whether or not we would be having a conflict with federal law and federal officers will be coming in here. And the younger generation, or those in their 50s, were more concerned about how this would actually take place, and the more details about the plan. They were much more supportive. But the two issues that were primarily arose were the federal conflict and the details of the actual bill.
New Hampshire is also a very important presidential politicking ground with the traditional early primary. Do you think that medical marijuana will become part of that dialogue there with presidential candidates as they make their way through the state?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know Live Free is going to be working hand in hand with grant staters for medical marijuana reform and going around and questioning the candidates. We're going to make sure that residents are aware of this issue and ask their future president where they stand, whether or not they're going to continue the arrest of seriously ill patients at the federal or state level. We're going to get involved in that, and we're going to get our ill residents who are in our network involved in that as well. I mean, the presidential candidates are all going to be here. It's retail politics, and you have a great opportunity to get right in their face and find out where they stand.
And we mentioned the sheer size of the House there in New Hampshire. Do you think that with all these legislators, it makes it harder to pass legislation or perhaps easier to start up a dialogue on these things?
Well, it really, unfortunately, it isn't. It's a little more difficult because what happens is with such a large legislature, you have a lot of the decision making being done by members of leadership and members of the committees who vote. It's a much more centralized system. So you have it's kind of difficult to explain, but you have a lot more people that you need to influence. You have a lot more cliques. With 400 people, it's kind of like high school. You have it's rather than two parties to persuade. You have about 20 different cliques or groups of people with different ideologies who you have to persuade. And each one, they vote the way they vote, and they have coalitions that they can produce. But it's a lot of speaking to different audiences. So you can get in some trouble there. But yes, the size of it does make it a little more difficult.
And Stuart, I do have to ask, what are the generally held attitudes about marijuana and medical marijuana right there in New Hampshire?
Well, as I said, we have the support of New Hampshire doctors. I mean, this is something that doctors here believe it's time to change. We just conducted a Becker poll. Becker Institute is a very prestigious polling institute here in New Hampshire. And when we asked residents if they believe that multiple sclerosis, AIDS, and cancer patients should be able to use and grow marijuana medically with a doctor's approval, close to 70%, I believe it was 68%, said that they would support that. When you broke it down by party lines, the majority here, Democrats, there was up to 77%. Independents, it was 70%, and Republicans are 56%. So New Hampshire residents have that live free and die attitude, and they think it's time to move on. That it's time to protect our patients. We just have to educate our politicians and give them a little more courage. Let them know that they're supported in this decision.
Stuart, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you joining us today, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me, and everybody please visit www.livefreeonline.org.
Stuart Cooper is the director of Live Free New Hampshire. We have links to their website at normalaudiosstash.com. And make sure you get involved with all of the different state legislation happening around the country. You can find out how in the Take Action Center at the NORML website. And of course, we have links to that today at normalaudiosstash.com. Listening to NORML's Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Make sure you visit our website at normalaudiosstash.com. That's NORMLAUDIOSTASH.com for more information about every day's show. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Thanks for listening today. See you at 4:20 tomorrow. podcasting technology of NORML is made possible by Red Aphid Interactive Media. More information at redaphid.com. Cannabis, pot, reefer, bud, weed, marijuana. 97 million Americans have tried it. Maybe you have too. Over 750,000 Americans were arrested for marijuana-related offenses last year, almost 90% for simple possession, breaking families apart and sending otherwise law-abiding citizens to already overcrowded courts and jails. The war on drugs is really a war on good Americans who smoke pot. The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, or NORML, is the largest and most successful organization seeking to bring an end to marijuana prohibition, allowing essential medicine to reach patients and for regular Americans to enjoy a greater level of freedom. Join NORML to end marijuana prohibition. Just visit NORML.org, that's NORML.org, or call toll-free 888-67-NORML. That's 888-67-NORML.